Hello, my name is Christy. I am super excited to be joining you this evening as all of us, begin our series on family. Family's really hard. Family's really complex. Family can be really difficult. You might grow up in like this really amazing, perfect family. And if you grow up in a perfect family, kudos to you. But I'm guessing for the most of us, maybe perfect is not exactly the word that you would use to describe your family. My growing up family was really, really complicated, the family I grew up in. On one half, we had this really, really, really close family. We got along really well. We laughed a lot. We ate dinner together as a family very, very frequently. We were in church every Sunday. We loved watching funny movies together. And we laughed, like anything that had like Steve Martin in it or Bill Murray, we were all in on that. We sang a lot together as a family. I grew up in a really musical family. We sang a lot. And the outside, a lot of people really thought like, wow, what a great family that is. Except there was like a second half to my family growing up. And it was not always great. My family was really tense at times. There was a lot of fighting. There was a lot of arguing. I don't know how many of you have grown up in a family that kind of has some stress when it comes to finances, but I grew up in a family that had a lot of financial stress. And if you grew up in a family with a lot of financial stress, that can really dictate a lot of your family and a lot of your family interactions and kind of like what the focus is a lot of the time. And that's how it was in my family. My mom and dad had a great marriage in the fact that they just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, but they fought a lot. And it was a really tense relationship. Still is, shockingly. My brother and my dad, once again, at times it was good, but for the vast majority, those two could really, really clash. There was a lot of yelling. There was a lot of fighting. There was a lot of tension. There was a lot of stress. And although there were really, really, really good moments, right, there were like really, really, really difficult moments. Family's complicated. Family can be hard because here's the thing, you don't get to choose it and you're stuck in it, right? Especially at the age you're in now, you're like, no, this is what I'm stuck with. Good or bad or difficult or easy or complex or a mix of everything. My guess is some of you have really, really great families and you hear me talking and you're just like, I can't relate to that at all. My guess is some of you are like maybe sort of like I was growing up. There's like really, really good times. Really fun family vacations. Mixed with like a lot of tension or a lot of yelling or a lot of like stress. Or maybe your life and your family life is like really far from perfect. And maybe you would actually say that your family life like kind of stinks. But despite whatever family situation you're in, the truth of the matter is like you're caught in the middle of it. And maybe what you're thinking is, man, I would really, really love this family dynamic to change, but like there's nothing I can do. This is totally out of my hands. I'm just like stuck with it. I'm just going to like power through and get myself through high school. But here's the deal. You have more influence over your family dynamic than you think you do. Regardless of your family dynamic. Have any of you ever lost your patience with someone in your family? You can just like raise your hand. Okay. You've all lost your patience. What about, have you ever yelled out of frustration or anger at a parent or sibling? I'm talking like raised your voice and kind of yelled. Or maybe talked back to your parents. Or maybe they were trying to have like somebody, like your parents was trying to have a conversation with you and then like it escalated quickly and before you knew it, like everyone's kind of like yelling at everyone and you're crying or your mom's crying or your dad's yelling or people are storming out of the house, right? Have any of you been even like maybe close to a situation like that? Okay. If we're all being honest, probably all of us at some point would say yes to at least some of those questions. But you have more influence than you think about changing those dynamics. You have an opportunity. Listen. You have the opportunity to be a godly, patient, kind, encouraging member of your family, regardless of your family dynamic. We are called to live like Christ, not around just everyone we get along with. We are called to be like Christ everywhere, no matter where we go, no matter who we're with, including our families. And we're going to talk about how tonight we can kind of impact that family dynamic. But before we get started, there are 3 really key, important foundational things I want us to make sure are established. Number 1, our world is imperfect. How many of you know that this world is a fallen world that's full of sin? Raise your hand if you know that is true. There is no such thing as a perfect world, which segues into this next thing, which is your family is imperfect. Every family that is walking the face of planet Earth is imperfect. There is no such thing as a perfect family. Your growing up family will not be perfect. When you get older and if you get married or if you have kids of your own, that will not be perfect because it can't exist. You know why? Because you are also imperfect. We all are. And that's what compromises our families. It's a bunch of imperfect, sinful people that are all living together, stuck under the same roof, intricately linked for all time, right? From the time you were born until the end of life, that's your mom. You know what I mean? You're stuck with her, like her, don't like her, have problems with her, think she's wonderful, if she drives you crazy, you're stuck. But here's the thing. You too are imperfect. I think a lot of times what happens is when it comes to family dynamics or it comes to interactions with our siblings or it comes to interactions with our parents, we kind of go into those interactions maybe thinking that it's everyone else's fault, not ours. That we're not to blame. Or I wouldn't be this upset, or I wouldn't talk back, or I wouldn't be this angry with my siblings if they did this and this and this. But it's certainly not me. I don't have anything I need to change because I'm being the perfect one in this situation. So here's the deal. You are not perfect. You are sinful. You are selfish. You are self-centered. And you want what you want when you want it because you think you're right. And here's the deal. That's what all of humanity is in the same boat as you are. Even your parents. Because that's actually the condition of sin. But to approach trying to influence your family in a positive light without recognizing your own imperfection is going to get you nowhere. Because all of us have a role in the imperfections of our family. I was preparing for this, this week and getting ready. And Friday night, I just totally lost it. There were 3 things that all happened. I was really mad. I was really frustrated. I totally lost my cool. I was yelling over rescheduling this dumb orthodontist appointment. I'm crying. We're going to the football game. I'm crying in the front seat of the car. I'm being sharp with both of my daughters. I'm can't even talk to my husband at that point because I'm so angry. And you know what? At the end of the day, it was really my problem. And I could blame it on my husband, or I could blame it on my 2 sweet, near-perfect daughters. But at the end of the day, it was my problem. I lost my patience, I lost my cool, and I acted in a way that was not Christ-like or godly or did nothing to bring about a more peaceful family. And we are all guilty of that. If your goal is to have a perfect family, it will never happen. But I can tell you this, you can really ultimately influence your family for the best. Because here's the thing, this is what usually happens, and correct me if I'm wrong. So often, we bring the worst of ourselves back home to our families, right? We talk to our parents or we talk to our siblings ways that we would never talk to our friends at school. How many of you know, if you're being totally honest deep down, that some of your worst behavior, some of your worst reactions, some of your worst attitude, and some of your unkindest words actually happen within the walls of your home. Because we say things or do things that we would never, ever, ever say or do to our friends or our teachers or our coaches. But we walk in and all the junk that we've dealt with for one day just dumps out on our families, and we are unkind, and we are sharp, and we are frustrated, and we are angry, and we are impatient. Now, listen, I am a firm believer that a home should be a place that you walk in and you can emotionally let down. I'm not saying that you have to be like Susie Sunshine every time you walk through the doors of your house. But having a bad day, or being upset, or tired, or frustrated, or you got a bad grade, or you didn't make the basketball team, whatever it is, does not give you the excuse to treat your parents or your siblings like your emotional punching bag. Because I can assure you that will not lead, one, to any type of peaceful family dynamic. It will not point anybody to Jesus. And it is not living like Christ. Because here's the thing as a Christian. If you claim to be a Christian, if you take the name of Christ, if you're like, yes, I believe in Jesus, yes, I believe he died for my sins, then that means that we are filled with the Holy Spirit. We have the Holy Spirit of Jesus Christ, of God living within us at all times. And there are no exceptions to when we get to choose to be a Christian and when we don't get to choose to be a Christian. Your home is not the exception to you being Christ-like. That is actually the most needed, powerful mission field you have. And you want to make an impact for Christ? My biggest challenge for you is to start within the four walls of your home. Our call as Christians, and our call to live like Jesus and be a light in the world, does not end when you walk through the doors of your house. God calls us to be kind and patient and loving and gentle. And he calls us to live and love like Jesus, and that means all of the time. And right now you might be thinking like, there is no possible way I can live like Christ-like in my family dynamic. But you can. You have the Holy Spirit within you. You can. He has equipped you for that. But I know it's difficult. But God will never, ever, ever call you to something that you're incapable of. He will never ask you to do something and not equip you to do it. He will never call you to something to watch you fail. He will call you to something and then equip you with the Holy Spirit in order to have the power to do it. So do not think it is impossible, because it is not. And he will never, ever call us to do something that he himself has not already been to us. There is no one that is probably more maddening to God than all of us, right? And yet he is perpetually patient and kind and loving. The key verse we're going to look at today is James 1:19 through 20. And this is what it says in James 1:19. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Slow to speak, quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And this is going to be our key verse for the day, because with your family, you need to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. But that's really, really difficult. But before we go any further, I want you to recognize this. God himself, when it comes to you, has been quick to listen to you. He has been slow to speak, and we're going to talk about what that means in a second, and slow to become angry with you. He will never call you to do something that he himself has not already done for you. So if we really break this down, right, the first thing is like quick to listen. It sounds really, really easy. In reality, it is really, really hard, especially when we're dealing with siblings or parents, or in some situations like grandparents or whoever you're living with, right? Because to really listen to someone, listen to this. To really listen to someone, you need to decide that what they have to say is important and worth hearing. Even your 8-year-old little sister is important and she is worth hearing. Even your really, really annoying mom, she is still important and she is still worth listening to. So many of our family feuds could be avoided or at least like incredibly de-escalated if even one person decided to truly listen in order to understand the other. There has to be a readiness and an openness to listen, but it's hard because you know what our first response is? Like, we want to get the last word in. We want to make our point. We want them to understand how we're feeling. We want them to come to our side, right? That's why we argue with our parents. That's why we argue with our siblings, because at the end of the day, we think they're wrong and we want them to understand what we're saying. And so we just argue and our voices rise and they raise and they raise and they raise. How many of us, right, are so intent on getting the last word in and making our point and trying to prove ourselves that we never actually stop and listen for 2 seconds to what our parents are actually saying? This was the problem between my dad and my brother. You want to talk about a tense, explosive, yelling relationship? My dad and my brother. You want to know why? Because they both always had to get the last word in. And they both always thought they were right, and neither one was ever willing to back down first and really listen to the other person. So what happened was, right, this continual one up, yelling, and it escalates. And at no point do either one of them ever back down and really listen to what the other person's saying. What happens is they're so intent on proving their point that it escalated the whole thing till we have a yelling match. And guess what? In the end, nothing ever gets resolved because they never listen to one another. I can assure you, your parents may not be perfect, but they do have rules in place for a reason. They are saying no for a reason. You may not agree with it. You may not like it. It might be the wrong reason. But what happens so often is we are so intent on proving our point that we never, ever just stop and consider what someone's saying. We never, ever go into it thinking, you know what? I might be wrong about this. We think we're right. We want to prove our point, and we do not have a heart or a mind that actually listens. What we have is a mouth that wants to prove a point. But what would it look like in your family? And really think about this. If you were the one to stop talking and start listening, do you think that could change some of the dynamic of your family? What if, instead of just this constant fighting with your sibling, what if you really listened to what they were saying? And then we're slow to speak. That's number 2, right? Quick to listen and slow to speak. Now, those really, really go hand in hand, but they're a little different because yes, you need to slow down and just listen to what people in your family are saying, but then respond in a way where you thoughtfully choose your words. So often when we are quick to speak, we interrupt a lot. We talk over the other person. Have you ever done that or gotten that cycle where now it's 2 people just talking and no one can hear what the other person's saying? Sometimes we say things we don't mean. Or we make broad generalizations, you always say this, or you never let me do this, or you're always doing this, right? These broad generalizations. Why? Because we're not actually thinking about the words that come out of our mouth. We're just so intent on proving our point that we never take a breath and say, are the words I'm speaking actually Christ-like? How often was that a question you asked when speaking to your parents? Am I being Christ-like to them? Am I showing my little sibling actually what Jesus looks like through the way that I'm speaking to them? Because in our minds, we're like, well, yeah, but those are commands are like for like when we meet like people at school. No, those are like commands for your family too. Proverbs 10:19. Listen to this. There's like a lot in the Bible that talks about like talking too much, especially in the book of Proverbs. There's Proverbs 10:19 says, too much talk leads to sin. Be sensible and keep your mouth shut. Many words lead to sin. What about Proverbs 13:3? Those who control their tongue will have a long life. Opening your mouth can ruin everything. I encourage you to go home and read James 3, right? So what James 3 talks about is taming the tongue. And what it talks about is just like, a huge ship has one little rudder that dictates the whole direction of the ship. It's just like a little rudder. That's what the tongue is. Your whole life and your tongue actually really dictates the direction. In your whole family dynamic, do not underestimate the power of your words and the power of like being slow to speak, because just like in James 3, it can change the trajectory of that ship. But you are the one that has to do it. You alone. Here's the thing about your words. Here's the thing about anger. Here's the thing about not listening. Here's the thing about being slow to speak. The only one that actually has any control over that is you. James 3 talks about how no one can tame the tongue. It is so difficult, right? Because we just run our mouths. I'm guilty of it all the time. Just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. You alone, you, not your mom, not your dad, not your siblings, you have the power to decide if you're going to argue and fight or if you're going to speak with grace and respect. You alone have control over your mouth, and you can decide, are your words going to escalate or reduce a fight in your family? You. Your parents can say all they want to. You need to speak to me with respect, but the only one that can actually do it is you. You want a better family dynamic? Then you need to take some time and evaluate where exactly can you be a team player here? Where exactly can you live out like Jesus Christ? Are your words going to reflect Jesus, or are they just going to keep reflecting your sinful, selfish heart that wants to do what it wants to do when it wants to do it? The third thing that verse says is be slow to angry. Slow to get angry. Here's the thing. Anger in and of itself is not sinful. Jesus got angry. God gets angry. It's an emotion given to us by God. Raise your hand if you've ever been angry. Okay, it'd be really weird if you're like, no, I'm just never angry. I'm so at peace all the time. Everyone gets angry. Anger, you want to talk about, when I was growing up, in my growing up family, my mom and dad fought a lot. My brother and my dad fought a lot. I did not fight that much. I was always kind of trying to be the peacemaker and keep things really peaceful in my home. I don't know if anyone feels that way too, this pressure of I got to keep everybody happy. I got to keep everybody happy. I got to keep everybody happy. But what would happen is over time it would just build up in me, and then I would just totally explode. And I have spent the majority of my adulthood, and my brother even more so, dealing with anger issues. I can go from 0 to 150 like a snap of a finger. I can boil with rage instantly. But here's the thing. It's one thing to have a righteous, godly anger. It is another thing to have an uncontrolled anger that does not bring about any good or any righteousness. the way to peace with your family is you need to keep your heart and your anger in check. You've got to stop getting irritated over the smallest things that don't really matter. You've got to stop living this life of total anger and irritation towards your siblings. You've got to stop running your mouth all the time. You have got to stop just like the incessant nagging and just like the fighting back against your parents all the time. And you know what? I get that your parents might be kind of awful. I get that your mom might like actually be kind of terrible and that your dad might be a real jerk. Listen, my dad could be a real jerk. You can't control that. You can't control your mom, and you can't control your dad, and you can't control your siblings, but you can control you. And do not think that you cannot influence your family. Here's the deal. When it comes, I've actually spoken about family here before, and I've talked about my growing up family, because here's the thing. My brother, when he was right around the age of 18, started to get really more serious about his faith, right? He started reading his Bible even more. He was like always kind of like a Bible reader, but even more, and really, really getting serious about his faith. And what he began to realize was who he was out with his friends or who he was at school was not how he was at the house. Like, he started taking some of these verses to heart. And what happened was my brother is the one that started changing his behavior and his relationship towards my dad. My brother took the first step, not my dad. Who's the one in theory, right? Like some of you right now, you're like, well, my dad should be doing that, or my mom should be doing that, or why am I the one that has to be Christ-like? Here's the deal. You know who took the first step in my family? Was my brother. And when he and my dad were talking, and my dad started arguing, and my dad started fighting, and my dad started to prove his point, my brother would just sit there calmly. And you know what he did? He listened. He really, really tried to think about what my dad was saying. He tried to answer back without any voice raised, in a calm manner, and validating what my dad said. That did not mean my dad was right. But that doesn't matter. Living out of faith and living like Jesus means that regardless of the circumstance, you are loving and living in a way to reflect Christ, even to your family. And guys, it transformed the relationship between my dad and my brother. And you know what started happening? My dad, right? He would kind of start a fight or start going, and my brother didn't respond at all, and then my dad would come back down, and then they would have just like a normal conversation. Maybe a disagreement, but a conversation. And it transformed their relationship. So much so that my dad, this is probably going to be no shock to many of you, my dad had a bad relationship with his father, right? Because, you know, these things just like work generationally. My dad had a bad relationship with his father. So my dad's like 50 years old, has this tense relationship with his like 70-year-old dad. Guess what he starts doing? Trying to have conversations with his dad the way my brother had with him. And that relationship was transformed. It didn't start with my dad, and it didn't start with my grandfather. It started with my 18-year-old brother, who decided he was going to start living like Jesus, even at home with my dad. You have that ability to influence your family by the way you respond. Are you slow to speak and quick to listen and slow to become angry? Because there are no exceptions to living like Jesus. Because that is how God is with us. We are sinful, and we are selfish, and we're kind of like terrible human beings, right? It's like human nature. And yet God deals so patiently with us. while we were still sinners, while we were still like in the thick of our own sin, God sent Christ to die for all so that he could be in relationship with us. He sacrificed his son to be in relationship. What are you willing to sacrifice in order to be in relationship with your family? Because here's what I believe. God has put you in your family for a reason. You're there. It is not arbitrary, and it is not an accident. You are there for a reason. So what is God doing through your life in the life of your family? There is no such thing as a perfect family. But man, we can really, really contribute to the overall peace of our families. So this week, let me ask you this. Think about this throughout the week. How can you be patient with your family the way that God's patient with you? How can you be patient with your family like God is patient with you?